Welcome to Storm Tracker, your eye on the storm of your Carolina Hurricanes, and your home for the best insight and analysis to keep you totally informed on what's happening with the Canes. Whether it's the latest news on the ice or off the ice, we've got you covered. Now let's begin. Here's your host, Tom Ray.
Well, the Carolina Hurricanes have their work cut out for them with 14 games in the next 28 days to finish out the 2025-2026 regular season. The condensed schedule has shown no mercy, and since returning from the Olympic break, the Canes have won 6 games and they've lost 4. The strong stretch before the break has become a seesaw of wins and losses, and on some nights, the Canes haven't really looked like themselves. After Wednesday night's win over the Pittsburgh Penguins, the Canes hold a slim 2-point lead in the East on the streaking Buffalo Sabres, and the Tampa Bay Lightning are just 6 points behind with 2 games in hand. What are we seeing from the Canes these days? Can they get back on track and finish strong atop the Eastern Conference? What are the challenges they face as they try to make that happen? Joining me as always, our hockey savants, Erin and Katie. Ladies.
Hi there.
Hello.
Hello. Okay. So, how are the Canes doing? It's kind of, it's the up and down of the season, right? They win one, lose one, and then, all kinds of crazy things are happening in these games. In fact, Katie, you were at the game last night, and that's probably one of the craziest we've seen. So they've blown leads in 5 of their last 6 games. They're just, it's interesting to be sure. Katie, what are your thoughts?
Oh, last night's game was pretty typical of what we've been seeing from the Canes through the first 2 periods. And then it's like all the rules went out the window in the 3rd period with the penalties and the breakaways and the turnovers and the change of momentum, just back and forth and back and forth. At no point in the game did either team have more than a 1-goal lead. So it was tight, and it was a lot of back and forth, and it was super entertaining. I don't expect we'll see another game like that from the Canes the rest of the season, because it's very against their typical game plan, but it was definitely good that they were able to pull out the win and stick with it and end up extending their lead in the Metro, even if it was just by a little bit over the Penguins.
Well, one of the interesting things we've talked about in the past, and it's certainly something we're seeing a lot of these days, the Canes struggling to get to their game. Historically, they like to get in hard in the forecheck. They like to get in lots of shots. They're actually lately have been getting outshot in some of these games, and they're not getting that forecheck going. Erin, thoughts?
Well, I know that it's been a topic of conversation for a while that the Canes did need to improve some of their transition offense and generating chances off the rush, because when it comes right down to it, that's how a lot of the scoring happens in the NHL. And the Canes have fallen behind as far as other teams, when it comes to doing that. So that has been part of the plan, I think, since they started adding certain players to the roster. I would point to Keandre Miller as one of the players who's very good in rush transition game. And I think that we all know that that second line, Logan Stankoven, is very good at carrying the puck, and he's very quick, So
Right.
Being able to get in with possession is something I think that they've been trying to do, and it's been part of their strategy. But like you said, it doesn't look like a typical Canes game when they're doing that more than they are dumping the puck in, forechecking hard, So you still need both. You have to do it both ways. You can't rely 100% on one or the other way of generating offense, especially in this day and age, and especially as we get to the playoffs. If there's anything that's been holding the Canes back in the playoffs, it's that the forecheck method of scoring, forecheck and cycle, it's very hard to set up a scoring cycle when you're playing a playoff game and when you're against top teams that are really good at breaking those up and getting the puck going the other way. So it's good that they're doing these things, and it's good that they look a little different. But there's been a weak spot there, and that is that the team defense has tended to come down a little bit. They're not getting the solid defensive play that we've seen And that's across the board. It's all of all 5 players on the ice. They're not getting it. But I think that that's something that they will have to iron out as they go forward.
Well, what do you think about some of this penalty challenge they're going through right now? They're getting all kinds of unforced penalties, offensive zone penalties. Just trying to figure out what's causing that. Katie, any thoughts on this penalty surge? We saw 4 minutes twice for
Seth Jarvis. Yes.
Seth Jarvis. Yeah, I was just thinking about something else. Seth Jarvis. Yeah, for sure.
I'm not sure that I can put my finger on any one or two particular causes. I just think that some of it is lack of luck. I mean, Jarvis hadn't had any penalty minutes pretty much the entire season until that one game where he ended up with 2, like you said, 2 double minors. So sometimes that's just how it goes. You get stretches where you take more than not, but the discipline really does need to become a focus for the Canes. They need to be playing in such a way that they're not giving away free opportunities to the other team. And it's a hobby on Canes Twitter to complain about the reffing and talking about, well, they shouldn't have made this call, but they should have made the other call. And I think every team's fan base engages in that particular conversation. So, it's just they gotta mind their P's and Q's. They've got to take care of their business and understand that sometimes the calls just aren't going to go your way. And once you're on the penalty kill, you just got to do your job.
Well, it's interesting because it kind of plays into some other thoughts we're hearing fairly frequently right now, which is that almost the dog days of the season. So the Canes are sitting there in pretty good place in first place. They've got some room. They're waiting for the playoffs, so to speak. And how do you motivate yourself to get up for all these games and continue to play at the level you have, all season? And there's a lot of folks asking that question. Is that part of what's going on with the Canes right now? They show up for one game, then they don't show up the next game. And is that related to this timing? Is it something related to where we are in the season? Erin?
Well, it has been a really condensed schedule, and as you pointed out in the intro, it's going to keep being just as condensed with games practically every other day. From a statistical, of course, they're clustered together differently. But I also think that the Olympic break may have caused more of a break in the rhythm than we're used to from the All-Star break, because it's a much longer break. Yeah. And, some players had time to travel home internationally to see family and friends. So, you come back and you're almost in early season mindset in terms of, where you feel like you are. You don't, in those early season games, there's a little bit of adjustments going on. You're figuring things out. And when you look back at how the Canes' early season went, they really didn't get that this year because there were so many injuries to the D-corps. So they did not get that time in the early part of the season to play and solidify and get all of those details down. So I'm not sure that we're not just seeing a little bit of that going on behind the scenes, that they have to, with very few practices and very little time off, they have to kind of get together and get everybody on the same page. And this is not the time of the year that you would usually do that. But yeah, over their last 6 games, it's been 1 win, 1 loss, 1 win, 1 loss, all the way through 6 games. So we would like to see the Canes start to string some wins together, right, prior to the end of the season, prior to when you get to that point where you're playing, our AHL guys are playing their AHL guys. We want to see them have some good, solid Canes-like wins and string a few together. And I think that once they get to that point, it's going to be very noticeable.
Yeah, and that's key. As the key thing is, of course, you want them going into the playoffs with momentum. So, we don't want them continuing this kind of, win-loss type of approach that they've been. Sure. One of the areas that I think has been getting some criticism, and certainly is an area we've looked at a lot too, is the D-corps. And, still seems like a work in progress to me. There's things that you like, and then there's things you're not so keen about. One thing I've really noticed, though, is some of the minute per game numbers that these folks are playing seem very, very high to me. Jalen Chatfield, as an example, he's averaged over 20 minutes a game this year. 2 years ago, he was just at 15 minutes a game. So this is a massive jump for him. And he's gone from the third pairing a couple of years ago to the first pairing with the Canes right now. That to me is something for discussion. Also, of course, we have to look at what's happening with the third pair. Gostisbehere has been out for a while. We've had Mike Riley sitting in, so lots of things happening on that side. Katie, what are you seeing with the decor?
Well, I went and I used Natural Stat Trick to look up a bunch of the numbers on the defensive side of things, just completely ignoring offense. And of pairs since we got back from the Olympic break that have played at least 50 minutes, so that's 111 different pairings, so plenty of other D pairs to compare them to. The Canes have still been pretty good in limiting the chances against, but once those chances get through, they end up falling behind a lot of the other top teams when it comes to scoring chances, high danger chances against. And the weakest pair by far on the Canes has been the Riley Nikishin pairing. Okay. Even to the point that their strongest D pairing before he got hurt was Nikishin and Gostisbehere. And then it's fallen off that much with it being Riley and Nikishin. And I think a lot of that just has to do with the kind of player that Gostisbehere is, the kind of situations in which Brind'Amour would deploy that particular pairing.
Yes.
Mm-hmm. Because of Ghost's skills, where he wouldn't be using that pairing in those situations. Ghost has also really improved his defensive game. It's not just his transition ability and those sorts of characteristics that he has. So when you look at these numbers that I put together in this chart, it seems like a lot of what's they've been struggling with will get balanced out simply with Ghost returning to the Canes lineup, because then Rod can deploy his group a little more evenly. That's where the time on ice, like you mentioned, with Chatfield having so much more even on the top line. I mean, they'll still get used as the defensive shutdown pairing, but being able to have Ghost and Nikishin operating at full strength will mean that they won't have to do it as much as they have been. Miller and Walker have been an interesting mixed bag. There have been times that they have been absolutely fantastic. Yeah. Like in the Pittsburgh Penguins game, they were phenomenal, creating all sorts of chances all over the ice, each of them coming up with a goal. It was wonderful to watch them. But there have been other games in which they have struggled. So a lot of their success comes with their matchups, comes with the game situation in which they're in. So Brind'Amour is really going to have an interesting balancing act to move forward, because we know him. He is a creature of habit. He is not going to just put his D pairs into a blender if he can help it. And he is going to move forward with these pairs. I just don't see them changing as much as we would all like to see. What Nikishin looks like with Slavin, or what Ghost would look like with Slavin, or something along those lines. I just don't see Brind'Amour going against his nature with that. Once Ghost's ready to come back, he'll just slot right back in next to Nikishin and move forward. They will go.
Well, it's interesting because, you look at the pair of Slavin and Chatfield, and they are challenged to do much offensively. And I think it actually hurts the Canes at times, because, if you had someone that had a little bit more offensive acumen, and that's historically been the case with Jacob Slavin. He had Brent Burns for a long time. Of course, he had Tony DeAngelo. Those guys were given the green light to make things happen offensively because, of course, Jacob could cover. I'm finding that's a shortfall of that pairing. And I know they're a shutdown pair, but boy, Slavin can cover for anybody that you put out there with him. And, that's something that I think needs to be a consideration. Something else that I looked at was I'm watching closely Alex Nikishin's playing time. And if you look at kind of some interesting numbers, in October, he was 1917 average per game, November 1917, December 1915. January was a little bit lower at 1641, February at 1512, and he's 1631 in March. But he's had some games in the 13 and plus minute kind of range. Just trying to figure out what's going on there. His lowest time this season was 13:14 on January 31st. His biggest minute time was October 28th against Vegas, 27:33.
Wow.
So this guy can play big minutes, and we know that. He came from playing big minutes where he was in the KHL. He averaged probably close to 25 minutes a game. So he's a guy that thrives, I think, in big playing time. And, he needs to see more ice. And now maybe part of it is, as you mentioned too, that, the pairing with Mike Riley. Although you listened to Trip Tracy last night, and he said, I think Riley's doing an incredible job. So I'm not sure how to take that, given the stats that you presented tonight, Katie. Again, Nikishin is a key player. He's a guy that can do a lot more, and particularly as they get into the playoffs, a big player that can lay on the body, that's going to be crucial. And again, I'm wondering about him on his offside, and that's something that, again, with Gostisbehere returning, Shane can play the offside, and that would allow Nikishin to get back to his normal left side position, which I think will help. Have you got any thoughts on this, Erin? What are you thinking about the decor?
Well, I think that you guys have covered pretty much most of what I would say, but I would add, I do think that you're on to something when it comes to the minutes being reduced. It's been primarily since Jacob Slavin returned, and obviously when Slavin was out for that long stretch of time, everybody was eating more minutes because they had to. So I think it's a great sign of, how well Nikishin was trusted to take on those minutes. I think that's a good thing. And I also think that in a way, it kind of did force Rod Brindamore's hand a little bit, because he does like to bring his kids along slowly, so to speak. He likes to give them the easier matchups and the easier deployment to start out. We've seen that with some of the younger guys on the team so far this year. And even though Nikishin isn't quite as young, he is certainly still a rookie in this league. And I think that would have been Rod Brindamore's preference would have been to start him playing those 13, 14, 15-minute third pairing minutes, for October, November, maybe a little bit more in December, maybe a little bit more. But because of the injury situation, we had almost a reversal of that. And as long as that's being communicated well to Nikishin, that he isn't losing ice time because of anything he's doing, he's not losing ice time because he's playing badly. And I hope that they're communicating that really well with him, because it is important. It's important for him to know that he's doing a good job and they like how he's playing, that it's just a situation right now of not having Gostisbehere healthy, and Mike Riley, like you said, Trip Tracy is a great one for pumping the tires of the people that don't necessarily get that treatment a lot, and you love Trip for that. Well, you love him for that. You do, because these guys, Riley is not an NHL regular, and he's never, going to be that. So it's good for the team cohesion. It's good for the team's identity, for everybody to feel like they're appreciated, even if they only make it in here and there on these games. So, but realistically, Rod cannot put that pair out there for 17, 18 minutes a game. It would be a disaster for the Canes. So I hope that all that's been communicated really well to Alexander Nikishin, and that he knows that he will get those minutes, he will get those opportunities, like you said, especially in the playoffs, when on the road in the playoffs, they're not going to have as much control about which pairs are out with which matchups. So he's going to have to step up and be ready for that, and I'm pretty confident that he will be.
Yeah, and he, along with Shane Gostisbehere, formed quite a duel. As we'd mentioned earlier, that Shane's defensive game has improved. Katie was helping with that. And I think, again, those two guys on the points, boy, I don't know. If I was the other team, I'd be I'd be a little concerned, because they're both, extremely talented offensively and can make some things happen out there. So I'm really looking forward to that duel getting back together, and I think that's going to help the Canes a lot. And they'll be able to drive their minutes up, and hopefully folks like K'Andre Miller and Sean Walker can see a few more minutes. They played a lot of minutes this year, so we want to see those guys get a little bit of a break as well. So talking about Nikishin then, I thought we'd segue into a power play discussion. And, we've talked about the power play a lot, and we look back and we kind of laugh, because on December 5th, they were 30th at 13.7%, and then went on a tear for a period of time. And we looked at their numbers over that time. In October, they were 9.7%, 16.7 in November, so a little bit better. But then December 24.4, January 30.6. Now they've softened a little bit in February at 26.7, And then March, it's been affected again with Gostisbehere being out, I think, and they're at 23.8%. So they have really seen their numbers declined since Ghost went out. In fact, they're 5 for 21 on the power play since he left on March 7th. So not nearly as good as what they've been. We knew they'd cool off a little bit because they were smoking hot for a period of time. But they've really started to struggle. What are we seeing with the power play, Katie?
Well, as you mentioned, having Nikishin as the power play quarterback versus Gostisbehere are two different types of setups that you have. It started off relatively strong. Nikishin has been out there on the ice for 3 power play goals, 4 since Ghost went out. But other teams are starting to key in on him and the type of shot that he has and where his threat is. He's not the slick playmaker the same way that Ghost is, and so it's a little bit easier to play him straight up and cheat on his shot. And I think the Canes have done a decent job responding to that as far as how they move the puck around and use him kind of as a decoy to open up the coverage a little bit more and create looks. And they have created a lot of looks. The success might not have been there the way that it had been in January, but they are definitely dangerous. They're definitely threatening, and they really make the PK for the other team work and earn their penalty kill if they end up getting it, because they don't stand still. And that is something that has carried over, whether it was Ghost to and then now Nikishin, is the Canes power play. It moves and it is dangerous because of it.
Well, and Ghost has a bit of a different style. He'll traverse the blue line quite a bit, more so than Alex does. And that seems to help them in finding, open spots, and he can get some shots through and so on. So I think they're both different looks. And as you say, they're really trying to stop Alex from shooting, because when he shoots, it's usually going to end up somewhere that the other team doesn't like, for sure. I think another piece I wanted to talk about while we talk about the power play, and I think this gentleman has been outstanding, and that's Nikolai Ehlers on the power play. He's a guy that continues to impress me virtually every game with some of the plays he'll make. He can make plays out of nothing, and he can do some incredible things. Erin, what are you seeing with Nikolai Ehlers?
Well, I think, he's got that speed, which I think is incredibly helpful for the Canes when they're getting in, especially, I would say that, when you're talking about Ghost versus Nikishin on the power play, one of the biggest things that I think Ghost does better than Nikishin right now is regaining the zone if they happen to lose the puck and it gets shot down the ice. That transition to get the puck back into the zone, if they, because, we all know how crucial Stahl was in becoming the face-off winning guy, because winning the face-off, starting with possession, that has been a huge help. But when they lose that possession, I really miss Ghost being able to get that puck back in, because he's very, very good at that. Now, Nikishin isn't terrible at it, but it's something that I think it takes a little time to learn how to do that with your teammates and so on. But as far as Ehlers is concerned, when they have lost the puck on a power play where he's out there, he's got that same ability that Ghost does to just get it up fast. And he doesn't always carry it in himself, but he does see the open man, and his passing is excellent. He's always very good tape-to-tape passing. So that helps them tremendously. And then, like you said, the plays that come out of nothing, you think the power play's over, and Ehlers manages to get a chance either for himself or someone else. And even if it doesn't go, you're aware how close they were to getting a goal, so you feel like it was a successful power play. Because the other team then has to regroup a bit, So he's been tremendous on that, and I think that he's going to continue to be a huge force for them in the playoffs on the power play. Yeah,
and he fills a role that Marty Nate has filled, I think, quite nicely in terms of getting the puck up the ice quickly. He can really, really move and motor, and we see him frequently taking the puck into the offensive zone and starting the power play in the O zone. So it's great. So the power play, still okay. They're sitting at 12th, so they're pretty well where they were the last couple of months. Haven't really fallen much, but not quite as sharp. And I think, as you mentioned as well, that we'll see, Shane Gostisbehere's contribution will really help with the power play. But I think the area that I was more kind of perplexed by, though, is the penalty kill. The Hurricanes have historically been one of the top PK teams. In fact, for several years under Rod Brindamore, that's been their calling card. And this year, it's really been up and down. In fact, sitting right now at 15th at 79.3%. And that's nowhere near where we normally see the Hurricanes. Looking at the monthly performance, I thought this was kind of telling. They started off October, they were 82.1%, so that's great. In November, 77.1. In December, they had 78.8. Okay, January, 84.8. So they had a great month in January. That's great. I'm not sure what changed, but things are looking good. Yeah, and then February and March were not good at all. February, 70%. March, 73.3. And the most perplexing thing to me about March, that's games with Jacob Slavin back. Mm-hmm. So, Katie, what are we seeing with this PK? What is going on?
Well, January was when Slavin came back. So I think when we've talked in the past, leading all the way up to the Olympic break, I think you can really have to kind of dismiss February because there's pre-Olympic break February and there's post-Olympic break February. So they were really strong. It was going well. They had their system. And that's also when Bussy was hot and Freddie was heating up. Yes. And so you got the good goaltending to go along with the good PK work. Since the break, obviously, there have been struggles, both with the coverage. I mean, the PK itself seems to be a little wonky. Some of that, I think, is the fact that it has been a lot of our PKers who have ended up in the box. And so that throws the groups and the systems out of whack a little bit as far as which D-man is paired with another D-man. And maybe it's not their normal partner that they've been playing with recently, or one of the forwards isn't there. There are a couple of different instances I really remember going, why were the two of those forwards out there together with each other when they get scored on? And there was some sort of miscommunication that happened. So there's that. And there as well, there's been the goaltending that just has not been as sharp since we have gotten back from the break. And I think that's also contributed to the lower success rate of the penalty kill.
Well, since the break, the Canes have killed 24 of 33, just 72.7%. So, yeah, goaltending plays in that for sure. I look at the D-corps, though, and this is something that I was kind of pondering recently. If you look at the crew that did the heavy lifting last year on the D, so you had Jacob Slavin and Brent Burns. They were tremendous on the PK. And then you came back with Dmitry Orlov and Jalen Chatfield, and they were heavy out there, hard to play against. They were making things happen. And I think that's a difference now. When you put the Keandre Miller, Sean Walker duo out, they're not heavy. They're not a heavy pair. And there's a little bit more room for teams to kind of, work their magic, so to speak. And that's an area that I'm kind of wondering about because they do use that pair a lot. Rod really trusts those guys a lot on the PK. And, that's a concern as we kind of move into the tougher games and into the playoffs because, again, these teams are playing heavier. They're harder to play against. They're more focused and so on. So, I'm wondering how this all plays out. Erin, what do you think about this in terms of, those D pairs? Are you comfortable with those guys back there?
Well, I think that at this point of the season, again, we're talking about, Rod being very comfortable himself with these pairs. I think that it's more a matter of, in all honesty, this is where not having practice time in this kind of a condensed schedule is really, really difficult for the teams, when it comes to these special teams usages. And that's true for the power play as well, but the power play can kind of hum along and do its thing, and you don't have to worry that much. But on the penalty kill in particular, you need to be practicing with different people. Like Katie said, sometimes the guy you kill penalties with is in the box, and then that also impacts other decisions. For example, the PK against Columbus was having some issues. They were Seth Jarvis was, like Katie pointed out, one of your regular PK guys was in the box.
Yeah.
Ordinarily, in situations like that, who does Rod Brindamore call on? He usually puts Eric Robinson out there because Robinson doesn't kill penalties all the time, but he certainly can, and he'll put Robinson out there to kill a penalty with the other forward.
Right.
But Robinson wasn't playing that night because they decided to bring in Nick Delorier and give him that first view of Canes hockey. So those are the kinds of decisions that are going to be looked at really closely down the line. You know, as much as everyone clamors to have, you know, the fighter in the lineup, it does impact these things because then suddenly you're scrambling with a forward that maybe doesn't usually practice the PK, taking on that duty while someone like Jarvis or Aho or, you know, even Jordan Stahl the other night was in the box, you know. So if someone who's a relied upon first or second unit penalty killer can't be available, then you got to make sure your supporting cast of I also like this guy, you know, they've got to be available. So it's going to be a big calculation going forward. As far as Walker and Miller, I think that they can be very capable PK guys, and they have been. But I think that they need to lean into a little bit more of their identity as a PK pairing, you know, because they have a lot to offer that isn't the physicality. The stick work is really good when they're on, and their speed is really good when they're on to get that puck out of the zone. And I'd actually like to see Keandre Miller do a little bit more of the trying to spring somebody on a breakaway because he's got that, again, excellent passing. He's really good at that. So instead of just shooting the puck down the zone, I'd love him to work with getting the forwards in position to take that puck and go off with it because we know that that's been fun. Certainly Martinook's shorthanded goal was a lot of fun. So,
no, and I think Keandre Miller has been sensational this year. I mean, he has just been incredible. And you know, again, he plays a lot like Jacob Slavin. He likes to use his stick to break up plays, and he's not a heavy hitter or anything like that. But he's very smart out there. And boy, I don't think you could question the work and play of Keandre Miller. You know, you mentioned subbing in some players for the PK. Well, it turns out that Nick Delorier even got a few reps the other night. I was shocked. He's out there killing the penalty.
I must have missed that one.
Oh, no, it's amazing. I just about fell out of my chair, so it's great. Okay, so you talked about something which, you know, we have been concerned about on and off this year, which is the goaltending situation and how that's affected certainly the power play or the PK side particularly. Looking at Frederik Andersen, Freddie won last night, and again, a lot of goals being scored. His last 11 games, though, he's only lost one in regulation. He's 7-1-3, so his record's a little bit better. Goals against average of .284. Again, they're giving up a lot of goals for the Canes. Save percentage still well under 900 at .880. So, you know, he's been playing better, I think, but we're still seeing soft goals. We're seeing goals that we think somebody could save. And, you know, we used to see some of those saves from Brandon Bussey, but I'll move on to Brandon now, and he's really struggled. So he has lost his last 3 games. He's 2-3-0 his last 5, and he's got a .405 goals against average and .835 save percentage in that period. He has really struggled, and he's making plays that are getting him into trouble. Somebody called him it was a Kochetkov play last night when he went behind the net, went down, and of course they scored. Even though Alex Nikishin made a great save on the first shot, but he couldn't get the second one. But the goaltending numbers are not that great, and both goalies under 900 on a save percentage. In fact, Freddie's at .872 for the season. These are not great numbers. Katie?
Well, I mean, I'm going to give the goalies a little bit of a pass on a few places because the Canes are not making their life easier, especially recently. So many of the chances against are grade A chances. They're on rush chances against, not blocking their man on rebounds, stuff like that. So not all of this, by any stretch of the imagination, is on Anderson nor Bussey. But the problem is, like you said, when you need a save, when you need them to step up and make that big game-changing play, it just hasn't been coming the way that they needed to it. Now, again, props to Freddie. Last night, he let in 4 goals in the third period, and it looked like it was going to be over for the Canes. Like his confidence was shattered, but he stayed dialed in and focused. And once overtime started, he made that save that we had been needing from him in regulation, but he made it in overtime. He had some very, very important saves in order to give the Canes a chance to finally regroup and get down the ice and win the game with under 30 seconds left to go. So much credit, much love to Freddie for doing that. But if he had come up with just one more save, one of the two breakaways that he let a goal in, if he had just made a save on one of them, or then it would be a different story. Then we'd be talking about, it looks like we have Freddie back in form, that Freddie's gearing up for the playoffs, that he, the Canes have confidence in him, because it is a two-way street. If they're if the goalies are struggling, then the rest of the players are going to be in their head a little bit as well. So they got to figure something out, both as a defensive unit and then the goalies as well, playing together to limit those chances and limit those goals.
There's an interesting stat that the Athletic put out today, which I thought was quite telling. And they were looking at percentage of games that goalies had played that they had over a 900 save percentage. Okay, 20th in the league was 37.8% of the games. The Canes are below that. So they stopped at 20. And we don't know where the Canes ended up, but they're below that, which is not a great number. So again, they've got to find their game. The first couple of periods last night, I thought Freddie, he's looking like the Freddie of old. And he's done this the last couple of games where he starts off great, you're feeling comfortable, he looks sharp. You're saying, oh boy, Freddie's back, and good timing. And then, kind of the wheels fall off. And he and Bussy lately, as I mentioned, are giving up goals that they just can't afford to give up. And this is, I think you're right, Katie, it affects the confidence of the team for sure. And they need to get that back. And, Brandon, we knew he was going to have some challenges. Goodness, he was being unbelievable for a period of time. And you knew he couldn't continue to do that. We just need to know that he's going to be able to find a midpoint here and get back to being able to play solid hockey for the Canes, because if he doesn't, it's going to put them in a very tough position for sure. And I feel comfortable he will. We expected, as I mentioned, that he would have some challenges. And the other thing, too, is opposing teams are getting the book on him. This is what they do. They play him 2 or 3 times, and all of a sudden they realize if I shoot like this or if I put it behind the net, he might get himself into trouble and we'll get a goal. So for sure, they're doing the homework, and the Canes have to, they have to do their work. Paul Schoenfelder and the rest of the crew have to, help these guys get their game back in gear. So again, work in progress, I think, for the goaltending. And of course, we hear every once in a while a little tidbit that Pyotr Kochetkov may surface at some point, which would be, I think, a very welcome thing as well. So let's keep our fingers crossed on that one. A couple of minutes on the forwards, and this was mostly, I think, some kudos and some good words about some forwards. And I thought we'd spend a few minutes and talk about a couple of guys, and one of them is Andrei Svechnikov. Svech, since January 15, 21 games, has 13 goals and 11 assists, and he scored a beauty against Columbus the other night. I mean, he's doing some wonderful things. Erin, what are you thinking about with Andrei?
Well, I think he's finally looking like the power forward that they wanted him to be all along. And I think that when you look at his path of development, these guys that were drafted he was 2018. I think some of the guys that were also drafted in the 2019, it's been kind of a similar thing. The COVID scheduling had a huge impact on these guys and their development. And I think we're only now starting to see that with some of these players as, at 25, 26 years old, or 24 for the 2019 guys, they're suddenly starting to look like the player everybody thought they would be all along. And it's not just Svechnikov. I think there's several others that you could probably put in that category. They missed a lot of time, and a lot of that was development time that would have been used, early on to help them get to where they wanted them to be. And then in Svech's case, you have the unfortunate reality that he also missed a huge amount of time with that serious injury that he had, the ACL tear and the surgery. So once you set all that aside and look at where he is right now, this is the player he was always going to be. And he's on a career high pace for points and for goals and points, I think. He's looking like the player that's going to have that kind of impact on games, and he needs to stay on that top line with Sebastian Aho and Seth Jarvis. They need him. They need his size. They need his ability to, get up in people's faces. The little interchange with Crosby last night was so fun, even though they both ended up going to the box for it. But, you want that. You need that fire. You need that because Aho's line is being tasked with at least the second hardest matchup, if not the hardest matchup lately. So you can't remove Svechnikov from that line and still have the kind of defensive impact, let alone the offensive impact. So, it's working out well. And, for once, I think you can look at our top line and say, this is the top line for the Carolina Hurricanes. It shouldn't be changed unless somebody's out with an injury, So he's been fantastic.
I agree. And the interesting thing with Andrei Svechnikov is we've seen his ability to set up goals that I think it's elite. He just makes plays that, you just watch and go, you got to be kidding me. And he does it with regularity. And now he can do some of this, these goals where he likes to, put the shoulder down and go in front of the net and just tap it in the corner. And he does that extremely well because he can skate so quickly and he's strong. When he's happy playing his game the way he can, he's as good as it gets as a power forward in the NHL.
Absolutely.
There's nobody better than him. And he's played well for a long time. So it's not like, he's got a nice run right now. He's been doing this for a good part of the season. And I think that's a real harbinger for the playoffs because, he had a great playoff last year. So he's going to be a guy that when you get into the heavy going, he's going to be somebody you can count on. So I'm really excited about what Andrei Svechnikov's doing. And, when you talk about players that are really doing well and on a path to actually exceed their previous highest point totals, that would be Nikolai Ehlers. And that's interesting because Ehlers, as you recall, he started slowly for the Canes. He's been just incredible. And he, like Svechnikov, since January 15, he's been going well. He's got 9 goals, 13 assists in 21 games. And he's a guy that 3 assists last night. He's just getting it done, right? And he's making plays all over the ice, and he's also extremely responsible defensively. And so, you start to look at the decision and the ability to get Nikolai Ehlers, and he is a game changer for the Hurricanes, no question. Katie, what did you see with Nikolai last night? Oh, man.
Well, the best part for me last night with Ehlers was the fact that he was so shifty. You never knew exactly where he was going to end up on the ice. He took whatever space was available, whether it was a lot or not much at all, and either went to it or got the puck through it to his teammate. My favorite my favorite assist from him was the one that he had on the power play because he ducked back in behind the goal and he drew not just the defenders but also the eyes of the other PKers, including the goalie, to himself, which allowed him to find Stankoven alone. And Stankoven was able to just tap that goal in, just a little bit of elevation to get it over the pad, and it was a done deal. And it was just so special because of how Ehlers just shifted the weight of where everybody's attention was and allowed that play to develop and then finished on it. He didn't just kind of throw the pass out nowhere. He got it right on Stankoven's stick for the easy goal. It was a thing of beauty. And I know a lot of us out there keep wondering, well, when is he going to get moved off the dad's line? When is he going to have, be able to play with more skilled forwards? And don't know, but I think Rod likes that line. And again, once Brendan Moore is happy with a combo he has, he's reluctant to go away from it for sure. But it gives that line, regardless, more pop. The other teams have to pay more attention. They have to take him seriously in their own zone because Ehlers will create from anywhere. He will shoot from anywhere. He actually has some of the best finishing on the team. If you look at the Hockey Viz chart for him, there's a lot of red for him with his finishing. So it would be nice, perhaps, if there's one suggestion is for him to shoot a little bit more, because he's got a really good shot and it is quite effective, and would love to see a few more goals from Fly. But other than that, no complaints. He's been doing great.
Well, you talk about him with the Jordans, Martinook and Stahl. Jordan Stahl having his best year scoring in many, many, many years. And watching the shorthanded goal by Jordan Martinook last night, I don't think he's got a problem scoring. Good grief. So definitely a line that, because they are the number 2 line for the Canes and they do play heavy minutes, I think it's great they have Nikolai Ehlers on there, because it certainly does give them a little bit of offensive punch. And he's continuing, of course, as I mentioned, he's a 200-foot player. He's a guy that's going to be right there defensively with those guys as well. So I just am absolutely ecstatic. And the other thing I've noticed with him, and I don't know if you saw this as well, but when he was one of the stars last night, he actually threw the puck to a little child that was in the crowd. And the bigger thing that I was interested in was just the glow on Ehlers. It looks like he's loving being a Hurricane. He's loving playing in Raleigh, and he's made the transition from many years of Winnipeg. He's now a full Cane, so it's great. And look forward to his continued contribution for sure. You mentioned Logan Stankoven. I wanted to spend just a few minutes on the line that Stankoven, Blake, and Taylor Hall. Stankoven, I'm a big fan of Logan. I think he's great. He goes in the dirty areas. He scored that goal. He was right in there. Okay, so he doesn't mind. He gets knocked down by Taylor Hall. He had a smile on his face. That's fine. He gets up and goes again. He's a guy that you got to love him. And you know what I've noticed lately? He's winning more faceoffs. He's getting a lot better in the faceoff dot. The other night he was 4 for 4. Last night he was 56 or 7%. He's starting to become very capable in the dot. And he's growing into his role as a center. And defensively, we know he's rock solid. So, I really like what he's doing. Blaker hit 20 goals. So, what can you say about that? And Taylor Hall just continues to deliver. Erin, what are your thoughts on that line?
I think that line has been really good for the Canes, and I think that, they're going to get better as they get older too, because there's plenty of room to grow. One of the things I noticed about, with Stankoven is that his contributions offensively last night has pushed him into the 40-point projected pace now. And now, of course, that's just projection. You don't know for sure how that'll all work out. But it does push him ahead of Jordan Stahl, which is interesting, because you were talking about Stahl having a great year scoring. That's kind of cooled off a little bit. But as we would expect, obviously, with the defensive matchups, that line has to handle. But for him to be on a 40-point pace in his first year as an NHL center is quite good. And, I think that when you look at the ice time, too, he's getting about 15 minutes and, 15 or 20 seconds of ice time as a center on that line. And he's actually about a minute and 15 seconds less than Stahl, so he's getting less ice time and he's producing more. And that's always a good sign for a young player. He'll probably outproduce Stahl by the end of the year. So I know that people are worried about that with the production on that line. Obviously, the big step will be whether he can build on that next year, because you want to see those numbers pushing 50, and 55 and somewhere in there. With the Canes, you don't really expect a second line center to start hitting 60 or 70. It's just not usually how they do it. But for him to be there is really good. And then he's obviously impacting what his line mates are doing. I think that Jackson Blake is on pace for about 51 or 52 points right now, which is excellent for his sophomore season as well. Yeah. So they're an offensive threat. Defensively, like you said, they're very good, but they're not being given tough matchups, and that is something I think we're going to need to look at as they go into the playoffs, because on the road it's going to be harder to shelter that line. And we saw in Columbus they were not really an effective line, and they were getting pinned in the defensive zone quite a lot. So we may see some little adjustments in terms of how often they're on the ice and against, which kinds of situations. I think in the playoffs, I think Rod will probably want to put that line out in some really good offensive zone situations, such as a face-off after an icing. Let them take advantage of that kind of situation where you've got tired players on the ice and they can maybe get something going. But you're not going to want them out in situations where that's going to be, exposed or where they're going to be having to handle a tough matchup. But other than that, though, I mean, you need that line. You need their scoring. I think that the way that they like to talk about the lines these days, at least from, I think, Adam Gold, is that, you have your first and second matchup lines in Aho and Stahl, and then your first, your secondary scoring line in terms of Stankoven's line, and then, we'll get to that fourth line in a minute. But
For sure. Well, Katie, you saw them last night up close and personal because they were just getting so many chances. They were stealing the puck regularly. They were getting great opportunities. I don't know how many shots Logan Stankoven had, 5 shots or so. He was firing at everything. And I thought it was appropriate that he ultimately scored. But that line, when they're going, boy, they can make things happen because Blake, of course, he likes to get into the dirty areas. He'll take the puck anywhere. He doesn't care. Sometimes to his own detriment, but that's okay. I'd rather have him going in there trying to do something than sitting on the fringe, which is quite often the case. What did you say with that line last night? What really jumped out at you?
I think what jumped out at me is just how the entire atmosphere in the building, from the ice up through the fans, changed when they were out there. It just truly became electric because you knew that they were having one of those games and that they were going to do something exciting when they were out there. Each of them ended up with a goal last night. They each had one, and they all had multi-point nights. So it was just a fantastic, hardworking, high effort, high energy game with them. And they particularly were really effective and dangerous when they were out there with Miller and Walker. There was something about that 5-man unit where Miller and Walker would do a great job keeping the puck in, keeping it alive, creating those third, fourth, fifth chances. There was one time that line just had the Penguins gassed because they could not get the puck out of the zone, and they would just reload and come back at them. It was fantastic to watch that line doing what it can do when it's at its best. Like Erin said, though, I still have my reservations for tougher matchups when they're against bigger lines. There's not the advantage of last change, but last night that wasn't an issue. Rod deployed them to perfection, and it was the best I have ever seen them play. And I'm not just talking in person, I'm talking period. It is the best that line has played ever together. It was a masterpiece. Mm-hmm.
Mm-hmm.
Well, as we go into the playoffs, a lot of success for playoff teams is with their third and fourth lines. And, the Canes, they put together a fourth line. Mark Jankowski has really taken control of that center spot. You've got Eric Robinson on the right side, and you've got William Carrier on the left. And, of course, Carrier was hurt last year, so that was a bit of a problem. This line is interesting. One of the things about Jankowski, he did it last year when he first joined the Canes. He went crazy and scored a whole bunch of incredible goals. And he did that against the Blues the other night. He showed that ability to just go in and put the puck in as a beautiful goal. And it was all on him. So he's got that ability. But do we think this line is good enough to get it done in the playoffs? Do we think they're going to be able to match up against some of the other top fourth lines? And there's some good ones. Erin, what are you thinking about with the fourth line?
Well, I love how they've been looking recently. For sure, I think that they all gel together really well. And I was intrigued. And I know you're probably going to want to talk about this a little bit, but I was intrigued by the addition of Nick Delorier in place of Eric Robinson against the Columbus Blue Jackets, because that is exactly the kind of heavy physical team where you do want, somebody out there that can maybe set the tone for that physicality and say, okay, we're not going to let our guys get pushed around. Especially since, I know my biggest concerns going into Columbus was not about the fact that they did ultimately end up losing the game, but I was worried about an injury because that has happened historically. Late in the season, we've played Columbus and someone's ended up injured. And it's sometimes been very bad. So having that option to put somebody out there and say, we're not going to put up with a bunch of cheap shots and trying to run over our players. We're going to have somebody out here that's going to tell you, no, you're not going to do that. And so between, both Will Carrier and Nick Delorier, you have a very heavy, heavy line. So they have the option, of course, to go to that when they need to. I think primarily they're going to stick with Robinson on that line because he provides the scoring, really. I know Jankowski, we all joke about what the Jan Gretzky phenomenon at the end of the season. But realistically, Mark Jankowski is not a goal scorer. He does not just pull goals out of his hat all the time. So you do want Eric Robinson because he has got the best chance of scoring on that line, especially if they can manage, once again, like we've been talking about, that transition play, getting him the puck, getting him in on a breakaway. Robinson has scored some lovely goals that way this year and in his time with the Canes in general. So I think that you have a line that's going to match up well with other teams' fourth lines on any given night, because against some teams, you're going to want the heavy physicality and we're probably going to hurt you, so get out of our way. And on other nights, you're going to want Eric Robinson with his speed and his ability to score. So they can do it either way. When you look at the teams that they might face in the playoffs, there are teams out there that have a very skilled fourth line, and there are teams out there that have very heavy fourth line. Yeah. So they're able to go back and forth with these different groups and go ahead and match up. And that's something they've lacked in the past. So
well, yeah,
it's really good to see.
You talk about Will Carrier and Nicolas Deslauriers, the Smash Brothers, right? So they could really cause some havoc out there. It was Nick's first game, so you're trying to figure out, is he going to be able to skate with the guys? What's he going to do when he gets out there and so on? And he seemed fine. And of course, he got into a scrap with Olivier. But I think the bigger question for him is not so much the scrapping. It's laying the body on, making himself heavy out there. I think that's the key role of a fourth line in the playoffs, is they've got to be heavy. And of course, Carrier is, when he's on his game, he's as good as it gets. And the Canes missed that last year for sure. So I'm kind of with you. I think the line's going to be fine. One of the things that I really like is that Mark Jankowski has been really strong in the faceoff dot, and that's huge. In fact, Rod, he trusts him quite frequently to go out there and take serious and important draws. So I like that about Mark. He's not a heavy player, particularly. He'll hit the guys once in a while, but he's definitely a big player, and he can be imposing out there. And boy, he'll make some plays that sometimes you look up and say, "Is that Mark Jankowski?" But don't forget, he was a first-round pick when he was drafted by Calgary, so he's definitely a player that at some point folks had some pretty high expectations for. So, fourth line, I think they're fine. I think they're going to be great. And again, Eric Robinson started very, very well this year. He's, of course, had some injury problems, but he's a guy that can chip in some offense as well. I wanted to segue from that into kind of spending a couple of minutes on the playoffs. Where we sit today, there's 14 games left, getting closer to playoff time for sure. As we look at it today in the brackets, the Hurricanes would be up against the Detroit Red Wings. So that would be an interesting one. But don't forget, there's a lot of battling going on for those last, playoff spots and certainly the wild cards. So this could change dramatically, and there's several teams kind of in the mix right now. When we look at this, how are we feeling today? Do we think any of the teams that we see below us are going to be a concern, or are we feeling pretty comfortable? Katie?
As far as the Metro is concerned, I think the Canes are sitting pretty. We're comfortable. It's just such a toss-up of who that second wild card is going to be. It's not worth really theorizing too much about that right now. There's going to be a lot of changes that happen between now and the end of the season here in about a month. So I think the Canes just need to focus on keeping their position in the Metro strong and secure, of tightening up some of those struggles that they've had that we've been talking about previously in the podcast, and also perhaps staying on their toes well enough that they can be competitive for first overall in the East. Because with those matchup concerns we've mentioned at various points along the way, it's obviously to the Canes' benefit and ease of playing their game if they have more games where they can control the matchup, especially those first two where they get to set the tone and hopefully take control of whatever series that they're playing in and give themselves the ability to be in an advantageous spot moving forward before they even play their first road game.
Well, as we look at that crew that's battling for final position in the playoffs, the one team that concerns me is the Columbus Blue Jackets. Think the Canes can beat them. Not concerned about that, but I think it could be a very tough series. Erin?
Well, like I was just saying, it's always a heavy physical game against the Blue Jackets, and we do have a fourth line that's ready to take that on. But you look at lines 1 through 3, and you have to say, okay, we don't have the biggest guys, we don't have every line has a big player on it. Let's just put it that way. You have Svechnikov on the Aho line, Taylor Hall on the Stankoven line, Jordan Stahl, of course, on his own line. But his wingers are not big guys either. And then, like I said, the fourth line is the line that could be the heaviest line on the team if they want to configure it that way. So a long series against Columbus, I think the Canes would probably win.
Yes.
But my concern is at what cost?
Right.
How many, do they lose some guys to injury? Do they lose some key pieces? And then they go into the second round of the playoffs already the walking wounded, because we don't want to do that again. We did that last year. It wasn't fun. They managed to get through that second round anyway, but then they ran into the Panthers and did not have a chance, really, because of all of the injuries and all of the people that were missing. We don't want a repeat of that. So from that perspective, the Blue Jackets would not be my favorite first round matchup.
Yeah, they're the only team that kind of, and we saw them the other night. They look pretty darn good. I'm not sure they're like that every night, so it's not, that's not something you have to just expect. Otherwise, they'd be much higher in the standings. But they are a team that definitely is on the rise, and they've got a lot of depth. So we'll have to be mindful of that. Okay, so 14 games in 28 days. Okay, this is a busy schedule. And they've got coming up, of course, they've got the Leafs tomorrow night, and then Sunday they've got Pittsburgh again. So they're going to get tired of playing the Pittsburgh Penguins. But as we look ahead, Katie, what are your thoughts?
I think they just have to play the game that they're in. They need to not look too far ahead and get too distracted by the playoffs coming up or even who their next opponent is. They just need to focus on the game they're in now and being the best version of themselves that they possibly can be. And that will be give them the best chance for success to finish out the season strong.
Erin, closing thoughts?
I think that looking at that schedule, their next 3 games, of course, are a road trip, and then they come home and have 3 days off before a back-to-back weekend game set at home. So that is a 2 different sets of challenges. You have 3 games on the road. You have a little bit of a break for the first time in a while. They will need that practice time. They will not be taking those days off. And then, a back-to-back weekend slate. So my biggest concern is don't relax too early. We know how important, like Katie pointed out, that Eastern conference position is going to be if they can be in the first. And if they can stay there and get those advantageous matchups all the way through the Eastern Conference final, that's going to be a big deal this year, I think. So if they start falling off too early, I think that's where you have to look at it as from the coaching perspective, and I hope they're already having these discussions. Do they start resting guys a little bit early?
Yes.
You wouldn't normally do that because you want to stay on the gas and you want to get through this part, within the next, I think it's like, I don't remember, it was like 7 or 8 games they could clinch, so that they're not in any danger of having to stay this way all the way through the remainder of the 14 games. But if players aren't being able to bring 100%, and if there's too many people kind of taking nights off out there, maybe go ahead and rotate some guys in, bring Delorier back in, but move out a different winger or something like that, just do what you need to do to keep everybody focused, because I think it's too easy to get complacent right now when from their perspective, maybe there's not quite as much to play for. So I want to see them come out and play every game to win it. And I really want to see them put together a winning streak of more than just the one game.
They do have Barry Kotkaniemi, who is available. So
yeah,
it's okay, Erin. I had to throw that in there.
I know. I knew you were going to. That's all right. No, I mean, no, seriously though, they could.
We may see him. Yeah, we may see him.
Yeah, they could. You could bring him in for a game if somebody needs a night off. But I think that's where it's got to be a whole lot of communication between the coaching staff, the players, and the medical staff, because I know some of these guys are playing through things right now. They have to be, and with 14 more games coming up in another really condensed schedule, there's going to be some bumps and bruises, the kind of thing that you would normally just play through, but this close to the playoffs, you don't want to make that mistake of pushing guys through things that, a couple of nights off would be all the difference. And then, if you don't do that, they may end up on the injured list to start the playoffs. You don't want that. So I hope they're doing all that.
They've got players in Chicago that could certainly come in for a game or two.
Absolutely. Well, wouldn't we love to see Bradley Nadeau? Wouldn't we love to see him come up for it?
There's 4 or 4 guys down there that we really like. And, even Felix Ungersorum, who's had a sensational this year. Any of those guys can come in. They're not going to hurt you. And it'd be fun for them to get some playing time as well. So, interesting as it goes forward. A little bit of a road trip. We'll see how it fares. We've got to see them get back to consistency. We've got to see them get back to their game. And they need to do that before the playoffs. And that's going to be kind of what we'll be watching together very closely and monitoring. And, of course, we'll be back in a few weeks and we'll talk a little bit more about what we're seeing and as we get closer to the playoffs, what we think might be the situation in terms of who the Canes might face and so on. So anyway, always great to talk hockey, ladies, and we could keep going, I'm sure, for an extended period, but we'll wrap here. And for those of you who've been watching or listening, of course, Erin, Katie, and I are delighted you spent time with us. If you like this episode, please press the like button. And of course, if you have comments or questions, please leave those in the comments section as well. And finally, if you want to be alerted of future episodes of Storm Tracker, please press subscribe and the bell buttons, and you'll be alerted just as soon as they're available. As always, thanks so much for spending time with us. We'll get together with you real soon, right here on Storm Tracker.
Thanks for listening. Be sure to like, subscribe, and tell your friends for everything with the Canes you need. Storm Tracker.